Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're talking about a movie that was basically dead on arrival, a total flop. But then, it became a legend that completely changed the game for Indian cinema, forever. So, picture this. It's August 15th, 1975. Sholay hits theaters. And the critics? Oh, they were just brutal. They called it a gravely flawed attempt, basically a cheap imitation Western. But then you fast forward, and that same movie is being hailed as the film of the millennium. It's considered, maybe the most important blockbuster in all of Indian history. So, what on earth happened? How does a movie go from being a total box office bomb to this massive cultural phenomenon that people are still talking about, like 50 years later? Well, that's the story we're getting into. All right, let's get right into it. To really get a handle on Sholay, you've got to understand its DNA. It wasn't just, another action flick. This thing was a whole new kind of beast. So what the filmmakers did was create this thing we now call a curry western. Think of it like this. They took all the epic stuff from Hollywood westerns, the huge wide-open landscapes, the cool gun-slinging heroes, and they fused it with a story that's uniquely Indian, about these bandits or dacoits. The result? A genre that felt totally familiar but also brand new at the same time. And the writers, this legendary duo, Salim Javed, they were like master chefs, just pulling inspiration from all over the globe. The main plot of hiring mercenaries to protect a village, that's straight out of Akira Kurosawa's masterpiece, Seven Samurai. That brutal, shocking family massacre scene, that has echoes of Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West. And the whole vibe between the two heroes, that buddy duo chemistry, totally inspired by Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But here's the key. They weren't just copying. No way. They were completely reimagining these ideas for an Indian audience. But look, a great genre and the cool concept, that's not always enough, right? Sholay had a secret weapon. The thing that really, truly set it on fire was one of the most terrifying, charismatic, and just plain unforgettable villains ever put on screen. See, before Sholay, most villains, especially bandits in movies, they had a reason for being bad, right? Some tragic backstory, some injustice that turned them to a life of crime. The writers here, they just threw that whole idea in the trash. Gabbar Singh had zero justification. He was just pure, sadistic evil. And that's what made him so unbelievably terrifying. And if that wasn't enough, what made him even more chilling is that this on-screen monster was actually based on a real-life menace from the 1950s, a dacoit who was notorious for mutilating policemen. To capture that grit, the actor, Amjad Khan, literally lived in his costume to make it look worn and dirty. And here's the craziest part. For all his legendary impact, Gabbar is only in 9 scenes in the entire movie. We're talking a 3-hour-plus film. Talk about making every second count. I mean, this one line, delivered with this perfect, chilling mix of menace and just curiosity. It became absolutely legendary. Gabbar's lines didn't just stay in the movie. They basically bled into the daily language of India. People are still quoting them constantly today. That's when you know you've created something truly iconic. Okay, so we have the genre, we have the villain, but how do they actually bring this epic to life? Well, the film's legendary status was forged in an equally legendary and honestly often punishing production process. Just to give you an idea, this thing became an epic in itself. The shoot was supposed to take, 6 months? It ended up stretching into 2.5 years. And the director was absolutely obsessive about perfection. Get this. It took 20 days to film a single 1-minute scene. Why? Just to capture the perfect magic hour light at sunset. So you can imagine all that time, all that effort. Yeah, the budget completely exploded. It ballooned to 3 crore rupees, which was an absolute record for an Indian film back then. And that ambition, you could see it everywhere, even in the tech. This was the very first Indian film shot in 70mm widescreen with stereophonic sound. It was huge. And they didn't just, find a cool-looking location. Nope, they built the entire village of Ramgarh from the ground up, right in the middle of this rocky terrain, just to create the perfect world for their story. But even after all that work, the film's climax hits a massive wall. See, in the director's original cut, the hero, Takor, gets this incredibly visceral revenge, killing Gabbar with these special spiked shoes. But the movie was made during a time of political emergency in India, and the censor board said, no way, that's way too violent. So literally just days before the premiere, they had to reshoot the entire ending. The new version? The police show up right at the end to arrest Gabbar, making the point that the law has to win, not vigilante justice. Okay, so let's recap. We've got 2.5 years of grueling work, a record-breaking budget, a last-minute reshoot of the ending, and finally, the film is released. And it was a complete and utter disaster.
I mean, the first 2 weeks were an absolute nightmare. Theaters were empty, the critics, as we said, hated it. The producers were so panicked, they were seriously considering reshooting the ending again, this time to stop one of the main heroes from dying. They figured, hey, maybe a happier ending will save this thing.
But then, something weird started to happen. Around week 3, business started to pick up. Word of mouth wasn't just spreading, it was exploding. And here's the interesting part. People weren't talking about the plot or the big-name actors. They were obsessed with the dialogue. People were actually going back to see the movie a second, third time, just to hear Gabbar's lines again. And that obsession, it turned that word of mouth into a tidal wave. The film didn't just survive, it thrived. It ran for 5 straight years, uninterrupted, at one theater in Mumbai. 5 years. It shattered every single box office record and held the title of India's highest-grossing film for nearly 20 years. So you see, Sholay didn't just make a ton of money. It did something much bigger. It literally embedded itself into the cultural fabric of India, becoming this touchstone for generations. The impact was so huge, the famous director Shekhar Kapoor put it perfectly. He said, Indian film history can be divided into 2 eras, Sholay BC, before Sholay, and Sholay AD. And its legacy is, well, it's everywhere. It basically created the blueprint for the modern supervillain in Bollywood. It made its writers, Salim Javed, into massive stars themselves, which was unheard of. The dialogues, as we know, became part of the culture. You still hear them in ads, in memes, in everyday conversations. It really set the gold standard for what a masala film, that perfect mix of action, comedy, romance, and drama, could achieve. Which, brings us to a really interesting final thought. In today's world, with 1 million streaming services and our attention split in 1,000 different directions, could a single movie ever have that kind of impact again? Could it capture the imagination of an entire country so completely? Because Sholay wasn't just a movie you watched. It was a shared national experience. And maybe, just maybe, that's the one thing that's impossible to ever replicate.